The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling marketplace of Kijani City, when the first scream pierced the air like a blade through silk. Camila Okonkwo paused mid-stride, her hand, instinctively moving to the medical kit, slung across her shoulder. As the head nurse at the city's central hospital, she had heard countless cries of pain, but this sound carried something different, something primal and wrong that made her blood run cold. The marketplace, usually alive with the cheerful haggling of vendors and the laughter of children, fell into an eerie silence broken only by the distant sound of running feet. Camilla's dark eyes swept across the scene, taking in the suddenly abandoned stalls where colorful fabrics still fluttered in the morning breeze and fresh fruit lay scattered across wooden tables, as if their sellers had vanished mid-transaction. Another scream erupted from the direction of the old quarter, followed by a sound that made Camilla's skin crawl, a low, guttural moan that seemed to echo from multiple throats at once. She had spent 15 years in medicine, had seen diseases ravage communities, and watched families torn apart by illness, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that emerged from the narrow alleyway between two crumbling buildings. The thing that stumbled into the marketplace had once been Malik, the friendly baker who always saved her an extra loaf of his famous honey bread. Now, his usually warm brown skin had taken on a sickly gray pallor, and his kind eyes had become milky white orbs that seemed to look through rather than at the world around him. Dark veins spread like spider webs beneath his skin, and when he opened his mouth, black blood dripped from between teeth that had somehow become sharper, more predatory. Camilla's medical training kicked in even as every instinct screamed at her to run. She approached slowly, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Malik, can you hear me? What happened to you?" But as she drew closer, the creature that had been Malik turned toward her with jerky, unnatural movements, releasing that bone-chilling moan before lunging forward with surprising speed. Training and instinct merged as Camilla dodged to the side, her athletic frame moving with the grace that had once made her the star of her university's track team. The creature stumbled past her, crashing into a fruit stand and sending mangoes and papayas rolling across the dusty ground. But it recovered quickly, turning toward her again with that same empty, hungry expression. More moans echoed from the surrounding streets, and Camilla realized with growing horror that Malik was not alone. The sounds were getting closer, multiplying, creating a symphony of the undead that seemed to surround the marketplace. Her mind raced through possibilities: disease, chemical exposure, some kind of mass psychosis, but none of her medical knowledge could explain what she was witnessing. A young woman burst from behind a nearby building, her traditional headwrap askew and her breathing labored. "They're everywhere," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "They're biting people, and then those people become like them." The woman was Zainab Keita, a pharmacist from the medical district whom Camilla recognized, but had never spoken to directly. "How many?" Camilla asked, helping to steady the younger woman, while keeping one eye on the approaching Malik creature. "I don't know," Zainab replied, her voice shaking. "It started at the hospital about an hour ago. Some kind of outbreak in the morgue, they said, but it's spreading so fast." Her words were cut off as three more gray-skinned figures shambled into marketplace from different directions, their movements uncoordinated but purposeful. Camilla made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of fleeing like every fiber of her being demanded, she grabbed Zainab's hand and pulled her toward the marketplace's central fountain. "We need to get higher ground," she said, her nurse's training overriding her fear. "We need to see the scope of this thing." As they climbed on the fountain's wide rim, the full horror of their situation became clear. Smoke rose from several buildings throughout the city, and the streets that had been filled with life just minutes before now crawled with shambling figures. The transformation was spreading like wildfire, and from their vantage point, they could see clusters of survivors running in panic while being pursued by the growing army of the infected. "This isn't just a disease," Camilla whispered, watching as a group of the creatures surrounded a family trying to escape in a small truck. "This is the end of everything we know." But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Camilla felt something else stirring within her chest, a fierce determination that had carried her through medical school, through the loss of her parents, through every challenge life had thrown her way. She looked at Zainab, then at the chaos surrounding them, and made another decision that would define their survival. "No," she said firmly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "This is just the beginning of our fight." The sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on a city transformed into a nightmare. From their precarious perch on the fountain, Camila and Zainab watched as their world crumbled around them. The creatures. Camila refused to think of them as zombies, despite what her mind kept screaming, moved with increasing coordination, as if learning from each encounter with the living. "There!" Zainab pointed toward a 3-story building on the marketplace's eastern edge, the old textile warehouse. "My grandmother used to work there before it closed. The upper floor should be accessible only by the internal staircase." Her voice had steadied, and Camila noted with approval that the younger woman was thinking strategically despite the chaos. A sharp crack echoed across the square, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Both women turned to see a military jeep burst through the wooden barriers at the marketplace's main entrance. Behind the wheel sat a woman in fatigues, her hair braided tight against her skull and her dark skin gleaming with sweat. She navigated around the wandering creatures with practiced precision, heading straight for the fountain. "Get in!" the driver shouted as she brought the vehicle to a sliding stop. "We got maybe 30 seconds before they converge on the engine noise." Camila didn't hesitate. She jumped down from the fountain and helped Zainab do the same, both women scrambling into the back of the Jeep as the driver gunned the engine. As they pulled away, Camila caught sight of the driver's name tag, Major Marakwame, Kijani City Defense Force. "What's the situation?" Camila asked, having to shout over the wind and engine noise as they weaved through abandoned vehicles and lurching figures. "Complete breakdown of civil order," Amar replied, her eyes never leaving the road. "Started about 2 hours ago at the main hospital. Some kind of infectious agent, but it's not behaving like any pathogen we've ever seen. The infected die, then reanimate within minutes. Bite transmission seems to be the primary vector, but we're seeing cases where even scratches are enough." They turned sharply down a side street, tires squealing as Amar maneuvered around an overturned bus. In the distance, they could hear the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire, followed by screams that seemed both human and not. "Where are we going?" Zainab asked, her pharmacist's mind clearly working to process the medical implications of what they were seeing. "Safe house," Amara said grimly, "or what we hope is a safe house." Command set up a temporary base in the old radio station on Uhuru Hill. High ground, defensible position, and we still had communication equipment functional as of 20 minutes ago. As they climbed the winding road toward the hill, the scope of the disaster became more apparent. Entire neighborhoods showed signs of chaos. Burning buildings, abandoned vehicles, and the ever-present figures shambling through streets that had been alive with activity just hours before. But Camila also noticed something else. Pockets of resistance where survivors had barricaded themselves into buildings, working together to keep the infected at bay. "There are others," she observed, pointing to a group of people on a rooftop who were using improvised weapons to fight off creatures trying to climb up through a fire escape. "People are fighting back." "Some are," Amar agreed, her tone carrying both hope and concern. "But we're losing ground fast. Whatever this is, it's organized in a way that doesn't make sense. The infected aren't just mindless, they're learning, adapting, working together." They reached the radio station compound to find it surrounded by hastily erected barriers made from vehicles, furniture, and sheets of corrugated metal. Guards waved them through a gap in the defenses, and Camila was relieved to see that the safe house was exactly that, a fortified position holding nearly 40 survivors, most of them women and children, inside the station's main building. They were greeted by a tall woman with intricate scarification on her cheeks and arms crossed with the confidence of natural leadership. "I'm Folek Adebayo," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I was the station manager here before this morning. Now I suppose I'm acting coordinator for the survival group." Camila introduced herself and the others, quickly outlining their medical backgrounds and Amara's military experience. Folek's eyes lit up with something approaching relief. "Medical knowledge and military training," she said. "That's exactly what we need. We've got wounded survivors, limited supplies, and no real understanding of what we're fighting." She gestured toward a corner of the room where several people lay on makeshift beds, some clearly injured, others simply exhausted from their escape. As Camila moved to examine the wounded, she noticed a young woman, barely out of her teens, hunched over a collection of electronic equipment that looked like it had been salvaged from various sources. The girl's fingers moved with practiced efficiency across keyboards and circuit boards, and multiple screens showed what appeared to be security camera feeds from around the city. "That's Nuru Aching," Folate explained, following Camila's gaze. "Computer engineering student. She's managed to tap into the city's remaining surveillance network. What she's found is troubling." Nuru looked up from her screens, her young face bearing an expression far too serious for her age. "The infected aren't random," she said, without preamble. "They're moving in patterns, concentrating their attacks on specific infrastructure points. Power stations, communication hubs, transportation centers. It's like they're trying to cut off our ability to coordinate and escape." The implications of her words settled over the group like a shroud. Whatever they were facing, it wasn't just a disease. It was something with intelligence, strategy, and a clear understanding of how to dismantle modern civilization. Camila felt that familiar surge of determination rise within her again, stronger this time. She looked around to faces surrounding her, Zainab with her medical knowledge, Amara with her combat experience, Folake with her leadership skills, Nuru with her technical expertise, and saw not just survivors, but the foundation of something more. "Then we need to be smarter," she said, her voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. "We need to understand what we're fighting, find its weaknesses, and hit back harder than it expects." Outside, the moans of the infected grew louder as darkness began to fall, but inside the radio station, something else was beginning to grow: hope, determination, and the unbreakable bonds that would forge these women into warriors. Night fell over Kijani City like a suffocating blanket, bringing with a chorus of moans that seemed to rise from every corner of the urban landscape. The radio station's main broadcast room had been converted into a command center, its walls now covered with hand-drawn maps, supply inventories, and surveillance photos that Nuru had managed to print from the remaining functional cameras throughout the city. Camila stood before one of these maps, marking locations where they had confirmed survivor groups with a red pen. The pattern that emerged was both encouraging and terrifying. Pockets of resistance scattered throughout the city, but isolated from each other and dwindling in number with each passing hour. "The university district still has power," Nuru reported from her makeshift command station, multiple screens casting blue light across her concentrated features. "I'm seeing movement that looks organized. Definitely survivors, not infected, but they're surrounded. Maybe 50 people holed up in the engineering building." Zainab looked up from where she was cataloging their medical supplies, a distressingly small collection of bandages, antibiotics, and pain relievers. "Any of the medical personnel?" "There's Dr. Asha Mwangi," Folake said, consulting a notebook filled with hastily scrawled information they gathered throughout the day. "She's a virologist at the university. If anyone might understand what we're dealing with, it would be her." Amara studied the map with the tactical eye of a career soldier. "The university is 8 kilometers from here. In normal circumstances, that's 20 minutes by vehicle. Now," she shook her head grimly, "the main roads are completely compromised. We've counted over 300 infected between here and there, and that's just what we can see." "But Dr. Mwangi might have answers," Camila insisted. "If this is some kind of engineered pathogen, if there's a way to stop it or reverse it, she's our best hope of understanding how." A young voice spoke up from the corner where the injured survivors rested. "My brother is at the university." It was Janala, a girl no more than 14, whose family had been separated during the initial outbreak. He was visiting the library when it started. If Dr. Mwangi is there, maybe he is too. The room fell silent except for the ambient sound of the equipment and the distant moaning from outside. Camila felt the weight of multiple gazes upon her, waiting for her to make a decision she had never asked to make. Somehow, in the space of a single day, she had become not just a survivor but a leader, and the responsibility felt heavier than any medical degree she had ever earned. "We need more information before we attempt any rescue mission," she said finally. "Nuru, can you get us better surveillance of the route? Camera feeds, traffic patterns, anything that might help us understand how the infected are moving." "Already on it," Nuru replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. But there's something else you need to see. Something I've been tracking since this afternoon. She pulled up a series of time-lapse images showing the infected's movement patterns throughout the city. Look at this. The images revealed something that chilled everyone to the bone, rather than wandering aimlessly as they had initially appeared to do. The infected were forming distinct groups that moved with clear purpose. Some congregated around key infrastructure points. Others seemed to be systematically searching buildings. And a third group appeared to be establishing what could only be described as patrol routes. They're organized, Amara breathed, her military training allowing her to recognize tactics even in this impossible situation. This isn't random infection behavior. They're establishing territory, securing resources, setting up defensive perimeters. Zainab leaned closer to the screens, her pharmacological knowledge adding another layer of analysis. The virus or pathogen, whatever it is, it's not just reanimating tissue. It's restructuring neural pathways, creating new behavioral patterns. This level of coordination would require significant brain function. But that's impossible, Foley protested. The dead don't think, don't plan, don't coordinate. The dead don't, Camilla said quietly, a terrible realization beginning to form in her mind. But what if they're not actually dead? The implications of her words hung in the air like smoke. If the infected weren't truly dead, but rather transformed by some agent that preserved cognitive function while altering behavior and physical characteristics, it changed everything about their situation. A soft sound from outside the building made everyone freeze. It wasn't the usual moaning they had grown accustomed to, but something else, a rhythmic tapping, almost like Morse code, against the corrugated metal barriers. Nuru's hands flew across her keyboard, pulling up the external camera feeds. What they saw made several people gasp audibly. Standing just beyond their defensive perimeter was a group of infected individuals, but these were different from the shambling creatures they had encountered during the day. These moved with fluid coordination, their gray-tinged skin still showing the dark veins of infection, but their posture and movement suggested retained intelligence. One of them, a woman who might have been a teacher or office worker in her previous life, approached the barrier and began tapping against it in a clear pattern. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS, Amara whispered. She's tapping out SOS. That's not possible, Zainab said, but her voice lacked conviction. They were all seeing the same thing, all forced to confront the possibility that their understanding of the infection was fundamentally flawed. Camilla moved closer to the window, studying the group of infected individuals outside. Unlike the savage, mindless creatures they had encountered earlier, these seemed almost aware. They watched the building with intelligent eyes, their heads turning to track movement they could somehow sense within. Nuru, she said quietly, are you recording this? Everything. The young woman confirmed. All camera feeds, all audio. If we don't make it through this, at least there will be some record of what happened. As if responding to their attention, the lead infected woman stepped back from the barrier and spoke. Her voice was distorted, carrying an electronic quality that made the words difficult to understand, but the meaning was unmistakable. We know you're there, she said, each word seeming to require enormous effort. We remember being like you. The room erupted in whispered discussions and barely suppressed panic. But Camilla found herself strangely calm. If these infected individuals retained some level of consciousness, some memory of their previous lives, it opened possibilities that hadn't existed before. It also made their situation infinitely more complex and dangerous. They're not just infected, she announced to the room, her voice cutting to the chaos of conversation. They're evolved. And if they can remember being human, they can remember everything else too. Our weaknesses, our tactics, our hiding places. Outside, more infected individuals emerged from the shadows, but these newcomers were different again. They moved with the shambling gait of the mindless creatures, clearly under the direction of the more intelligent ones. The group outside their shelter was a mixed force, thinking leaders directing mindless soldiers. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, Camilla continued, watching as the organized group of infected began to systematically probe their defenses. We're fighting for the future of human consciousness itself. The tapping on the metal barriers resumed, but this time it carried a different rhythm. Not SOS, but something else entirely. Something that sounded almost like a countdown. The countdown reached 0 at exactly 3:47 a.m., and hell erupted around the radio station. The first explosion came from the eastern wall, where someone or something had planted an improvised device against the corrugated metal barriers. The blast sent shrapnel flying to the compound, and through the smoking gap came the infected in a coordinated assault that bore no resemblance to the mindless shuffling they had witnessed during the day. Camila hit the floor as windows shattered around her, instinctively covering Janal with her body as debris rained down. The young girl's scream was lost in the chaos of automatic weapons fire as Amara and 2 other survivors with military experience returned fire through the breach. "They're using tactics," Amara shouted over the noise, her voice carrying both amazement and terror. "Covering fire, flanking maneuvers. These aren't mindless infected." Nuru's fingers flew across her keyboards even as she ducked beneath her improvised desk, trying to maintain their surveillance network, while the building shook with each new explosion. 3 more breach points," she called out, her young voice steady despite the circumstances. "North wall, south entrance, and they're trying to come up through the old drainage tunnel." Folake had taken charge of evacuating the wounded and children to the building's upper levels, her voice cutting through the chaos with the authority of someone accustomed to crisis management. "Medical supplies, ammunition, and communication equipment only," she ordered. "Everything else gets left behind." Zainab worked frantically to gather their precious medicine, while staying low to avoid the crossfire. A stray bullet whined past her head, embedding itself in the wall where she had been standing moments before. Through the breach, she could see the intelligent infected coordinating their assault with hand signals and what appeared to be spoken commands in that same distorted electronic voice they had heard earlier. "Camila," Amara's voice was urgent. "We can't hold this position. Whatever they become, they're learning faster than we can adapt." The decision to abandon their sanctuary was made for them when a new sound joined the cacophony, the deep rumble of heavy machinery. Through the smoke and chaos, the defenders could see infected individuals operating a small bulldozer, clearly intent on bringing down the entire building. "Everyone out," Camila ordered, grabbing the emergency bag of medical supplies and helping Janala to her feet. Up the emergency stairs to the roof. "Move." The evacuation was a nightmare of smoke, screaming, and the constant rattle of gunfire. They lost 2 survivors in the stairwell when a section of infected broke through the south entrance faster than expected. Camila forced herself not to look back at the bodies, focusing instead on getting the remaining 23 people to the roof. The night air hit them like a physical blow after the smoke-filled building, and the view from the rooftop revealed the true scope of their defeat. The radio station was just one small conflict in a citywide assault that had clearly been planned with military precision. Fires burned throughout Kajani City, and the organized groups of infected were systematically eliminating every known survivor stronghold. The university, Nuru gasped, staring at her tablet, which still somehow maintained a data connection. They hit the university first. Dr. Mwangi's building, it's gone. The implications crashed over them like a physical blow. If the infected had targeted the university's virology department specifically, it suggested they knew exactly who posed the greatest threat to their existence. This wasn't random violence. It was strategic elimination of human resistance. There, Amara pointed toward the eastern edge of the city, where a collection of old industrial buildings remained dark against the burning skyline. The textile district. Most of those buildings have been abandoned for years, but they're built like fortresses. Stone construction, narrow windows, multiple levels. "It's 8 kilometers, Foley protested, studying the route they would need to take, with children and wounded moving at night while being hunted. "We don't have a choice," Camila replied grimly. "Staying here means dying here." The journey across the city became a lesson in true human resilience and the bonds that form under extreme pressure. They moved in single file through abandoned buildings, sewers, and maintenance tunnels, with Amara leading reconnaissance and Nuru using her remaining battery power to monitor camera feeds for hostile movement. It was during this exodus that they encountered other survivor groups, scattered families, isolated individuals, and 2 other organized resistance cells. Rather than competing for resources, they found themselves naturally combining forces, with Camilla's leadership experience helping to coordinate what became a convoy of nearly 60 people. Among the new survivors was an elderly woman named Asha, not the virologist they had hoped to rescue, but a traditional healer whose knowledge of herbal medicine proved invaluable when their modern medical supplies began to run low. Her presence brought a calming influence to the group, and her stories during brief rest stops reminded everyone that humans had survived countless disasters throughout history. "My grandmother lived through colonial wars," Asha told them as they sheltered in an abandoned subway tunnel, her weather hands tending to a young man's infected wound. She always said that the strongest weapon against oppression wasn't guns or bombs, but the refusal to stop being human. As dawn broke over their new stronghold in the textile district, Camilla found herself standing watch on the highest tower, looking back toward the radio station that now burned in the distance. They had lost their safe haven, their supplies, and their hope of finding easy answers to the infection that was consuming their world. But they had also learned something crucial about their enemy and about themselves. The infected might have retained their intelligence and gained new capabilities, but humanity's greatest advantage had always been its ability to adapt, to work together, to find hope in the darkest circumstances. "They might be smarter than we thought," she murmured to herself, watching smoke rise from the ruins of their former shelter. "But they've forgotten what it means to be human, and that's going to be their downfall." Behind her, the sound of survivors organizing their new defense, tending to their wounded, and sharing their few remaining resources filled the morning air. They were no longer just refugees fleeing an outbreak. They were the foundation of human resistance against an enemy that threatened not just their lives, but their very humanity. The real battle was just beginning. 3 weeks into the outbreak, the textile district had transformed from an abandoned industrial wasteland into something resembling a fortress city. What began as a desperate refuge for 60 survivors had grown into a community of over 200 people, as other resistance groups throughout the region heard whispered stories of a place where humans still fought back effectively. Camilla stood in what had once been the main production floor of the largest textile factory, now converted into a combination medical bay, strategy center, and community meeting space. The morning light streaming through the high windows illuminated a scene that would have been unimaginable a month ago. Children playing quietly in corners while adults worked on everything from weapon maintenance to food preparation, all under the watchful eyes of sentries posted at every entrance. "The infection is spreading beyond the city," Nuru reported from her expanded command center, now equipped with salvage equipment from a dozen different sources. Her technical skills had evolved rapidly under pressure, and she had managed to establish communication with survivor groups as far as 500 kilometers away. But so is resistance. People are learning to fight back. The news was a mixture of hope and despair. While human survivors were indeed organizing and learning to combat the infected, the scale of the outbreak had grown exponentially. Entire regions had gone dark, their communication networks eliminated with the same strategic precision they had witnessed in Kijani City. Zainab approached carrying a leather-bound journal that had become her most precious possession, a detailed record of everything they had learned about the infection. "I've been analyzing progression patterns," she said, spreading hand-drawn charts across a makeshift table. "The infection isn't random. It targets specific individuals first: medical professionals, scientists, military leaders, anyone with knowledge that could be used to develop countermeasures. That supports our theory about retained intelligence," Amara noted, looking up from where she was training a group of teenagers in basic combat tactics. "They're not just intelligent individually. They're sharing information, coordinating on a scale we're only beginning to understand." Folake entered the conversation area carrying a steaming pot of thin but nutritious soup that had become their daily staple, made from whatever edible materials their foraging teams could find. Speaking of coordination, she said, "We've got a problem. 3 separate survivor groups have reported the same thing: infected individuals who appear to be documenting human settlements, taking detailed observations before disappearing without attacking. The implications were chilling. If the infected were conducting reconnaissance, it suggested they were planning something larger than the random assaults that had characterized the early days of the outbreak. It also meant that their own stronghold, successful as it had been, might already be under observation. Young Janala, who had grown considerably older in demeanor despite only 3 weeks passing, looked up from where she was helping to sort salvaged medical supplies. "My uncle was a soldier," she said quietly. "He always said that in war, the side that waits for the enemy to attack usually loses." From the mouth of a child came the strategic insight that had been nagging at all of them. They had spent weeks learning to defend, to survive, to hide from the infected, but defense alone would not reclaim their world. "She's right," Camila said, her voice carrying the authority that had developed naturally over their time together. "We need to stop thinking like survivors and start thinking like liberators." Asha, who had become not just their healer but their spiritual anchor, looked up from where she was preparing herbal medicines. "Liberation requires understanding your enemy," she said in her soft but carrying voice. "We know they're intelligent, organized, and strategic, but we don't know what they want beyond eliminating us." "Maybe that's exactly what we need to find out," Camila replied, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "Nuru, your surveillance network. Have you identified any patterns in infected behavior beyond the reconnaissance missions?" The young woman pulled up several screens showing movement patterns throughout the city. "Actually, yes. They're constructing something. Multiple locations, all following similar patterns. Large-scale building projects using materials and equipment they've scavenged from industrial sites." "Building what?" Amara asked, her tactical mind immediately recognizing the importance of understanding enemy construction projects. "I'm not sure," Nuru admitted, "but based on the scale and the materials they're using, it looks like infrastructure, power generation, communication arrays, possibly even manufacturing facilities." The revelation sent a chill through the group. If the infected were building infrastructure rather than simply destroying human civilization, it suggested they weren't just trying to eliminate humanity. They were trying to replace it. "They're not just infected," Zainab said slowly, her medical training helping her process the implications. "They're colonizers. This isn't a disease outbreak. It's an invasion using biological weapons." Folake set down her pot of soup with more force than necessary, her administrative mind already working through the logistics. "If that's true, then everything we've been assuming about their goals is wrong. They don't want to destroy our civilization. They want to inherit it." "Which means they need humans," Camila said, following the logic to its conclusion. "Not all of us, probably not even most of us, but some, for knowledge, for skills, for purposes we probably don't want to think about." The group fell silent as the weight of their new understanding settled over them. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting against absorption into something that might preserve their bodies and even their minds while stripping away everything that made them human. "So what do we do?" Janala asked, her young voice cutting through the heavy silence. Camila looked around at the faces surrounding her, faces that had become as familiar as family over their weeks together. People who had shared every danger and hardship, who had proven their courage and loyalty beyond any doubt. They were no longer just random survivors thrown together by circumstance. They had become something more, a unit, a family, a resistance movement. "We do what humans have always done when faced with extinction," she said firmly. "We adapt, we evolve, and we fight back smarter and harder than our enemies expect. But first, we need to know exactly what we're fighting." "A reconnaissance mission," Amara said, understanding immediately, "into infected territory, to observe their construction projects and gather intelligence about their capabilities and intentions." "Exactly," Camila confirmed. "Small team, high mobility, focus on information gathering rather than engagement." "I volunteer," several voices said simultaneously, but Camila held up her hand. "This isn't about volunteering," she said gently. "This is about selecting the right people for a mission that could determine the survival of our entire species. We get one chance to do this right." As the day progressed and their plan took shape, Camila found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that first morning in the marketplace. She had been a nurse then, focused on healing individual patients and managing medical crises. Now she was something else entirely, a leader, a strategist, a guardian of human civilization itself. But at its core, her mission remained the same: to preserve life, to heal what was broken, and to ensure that the vulnerable were protected. The scale had simply expanded from individual patients to the entire human species. Outside, the sun was setting over their fortified community, and the familiar sounds of evening routines, children being called to dinner, guards changing shifts, the quiet murmur of adults planning for tomorrow, provided a comforting reminder of what they were fighting to preserve. Tomorrow, they would begin their mission to understand their enemy. Tonight, they will hold on to their humanity with both hands and remind themselves why it was worth saving. The dawn mist clung to the abandoned streets like smoke as Camila, Amara, Nuru, and Zainab made their way through the industrial sector toward the infected construction site that Nuru had identified from satellite imagery. Each woman carried equipment suited to her role. Camila with medical scanners and sample collection materials, Amara with tactical gear and weapons, Nuru with portable surveillance equipment, and Zainab with chemical analysis tools. They moved through the ruins of human civilization with practiced stealth, following routes that Amara had scouted over multiple nights. The infected patrols followed predictable patterns, suggesting they had established a routine that prioritized efficiency over security, a potential weakness that could be exploited. 200 meters ahead, Nuru whispered, checking her tablet that was loaded with real-time feeds from a few remaining city cameras. The construction site should be just beyond that overpass. What they discovered when they reached their vantage point defied every assumption they had made about the infected. The massive construction site stretched across several city blocks, filled with activity that resembled nothing so much as a highly organized industrial operation. Infected workers operated heavy machinery with precision, while others assembled what appeared to be sophisticated electronic equipment using components salvaged from throughout the city. But it was the structures themselves that made Camila's blood run cold. Rising from the construction site were towers that bore an unsettling resemblance to cell phone communication arrays, but far more complex and powerful than anything human technology had produced. Between the towers, smaller buildings were taking shape that looked disturbingly like processing centers or laboratories. "They're building a network," Zainab breathed, her scientific training allowing her to recognize a pattern. "Those towers, they're not just communication arrays. They're transmission stations." "Transmitting what?" Amara asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really want to know the answer. Nuru was already adjusting her equipment, trying to detect any electronic signals emanating from the partially completed structures. "I'm picking up low-frequency transmissions," she reported quietly. "Very low frequency, almost subsonic. The pattern, it's almost like..." "Like what?" Camila prompted. "Like a heartbeat," Nuru finished, her young face pale with the implications. A coordinated heartbeat across multiple transmission points. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The infected weren't just building infrastructure. They were creating a collective consciousness network, a way to coordinate their activities across vast distances in real time. If they completed this project, human resistance would become nearly impossible. "Look there," Amara pointed toward a section of construction site where infected workers were assembling what appeared to be holding cells or containment units. "Those aren't for equipment storage." Indeed, the structures looked disturbingly like prison cells, but designed with technology that included intravenous feeding systems and what appeared to be neural monitoring equipment. The implication was clear. These were designed to hold humans, not just as prisoners, but as subjects for some kind of ongoing process. "Conversion chambers," Zainab said quietly, her medical knowledge allowing her to recognize the purpose of the equipment. "They're not just trying to kill us or absorb us. They're planning to convert us systematically, probably to retain our knowledge and skills while ensuring our loyalty to their collective." Camila felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "How long until they're operational?" Nuru consulted her measurements and observations. "Based on the construction progress, maybe 2 weeks for the first phase. The network towers could be online even sooner." "We need samples," Camila decided. "Biological samples from the infected workers, electronic samples from their equipment, anything that might help us understand how this process works and potentially how to reverse it." The next hour was the most terrifying of their lives as they systematically infiltrated the construction site. Amara's military training proved invaluable as she guided them through gaps in the infected patrol patterns, while Nuru's technical skills allowed her to tap into the electronic systems without triggering security protocols. Zainab managed to collect several biological samples from infected workers who had shed skin cells or other tissue during their construction activities. Under her portable microscope, the samples revealed something that made her gasp audibly. "The infection isn't destroying the original cellular structure," she whispered, staring at the microscopic images. "It's enhancing it, adding new neural pathways, improving cellular efficiency, extending what should be the natural lifespan. These aren't dead people reanimated. They're living people who have been upgraded." The distinction was crucial. If the infected were enhanced humans rather than reanimated corpses, it explained their intelligence, their coordination, and their strategic thinking. It also suggested that the conversion process might, theoretically, be reversible. That's why they need the network, Camila realized. Individual enhancement is one thing, but true collective consciousness requires constant communication between all members. They're building a hive mind. As they prepare to leave with their samples and data, Nuru made one final discovery that would change everything. Hidden in the code of the electronic system she had accessed was something that looked remarkably like a countdown timer. 72 hours, she reported, her voice barely audible. Whatever they're planning to do with the network, they're planning to do it in 72 hours. The journey back to their stronghold passed in tense silence as each woman processed the implications of what they had discovered. They weren't just facing an enemy that wanted to eliminate humanity. They were facing an enemy that wanted to absorb humanity into something larger and fundamentally different from what they had always been. Back at the textile district, their report to community leadership created an immediate crisis. With only 3 days before the infected activated their network, any hope of mounting a traditional resistance seemed futile. The scale of what they were facing dwarfed their resources and capabilities. "We can't fight them directly," Folake said, her administrative mind working through the logistics. 200 people, limited weapons and supplies, against an enemy that will soon have instantaneous coordination across the entire region. "Then we don't fight them directly," Camila said, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "We do what humans have always done when faced with a stronger enemy. We use our intelligence, our creativity, and our willingness to sacrifice for something greater than ourselves." "What are you thinking?" Amara asked, her tactical experience recognizing the tone of someone developing a plan. Camila looked around at the faces of her companions. Women who had become more than friends, more than allies, who had become the closest thing to family she had ever known. What she was thinking would require everything they had learned, everything they had become, and everything they were willing to risk. "We're going to turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness," she said. "We're going to give them exactly what they want, and make them regret it." The plan that emerged over following hours was audacious, dangerous, and relied on assumptions about infected psychology that could prove fatally wrong. But it was also the only plan that offered any hope of preserving human consciousness in a world that was rapidly becoming something entirely different. As night fell over their stronghold, Camila stood once again on the highest tower, looking out over a city that had become an alien landscape. In 72 hours, everything would change. The only question was whether humanity would emerge from that change as conquerors, subjects, or something entirely new. The countdown had reached 18 hours when Camila made the announcement that would define their final stand. Standing before the assembled community in the main hall of their textile district stronghold, she outlined a plan so desperate and dangerous that several people immediately protested its impossibility. "We're going to infiltrate their network," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had developed over their weeks together. "Not destroy it, but to corrupt it from within, to introduce human consciousness into their collective system and create cognitive dissonance that will tear their coordination apart." The plan required 3 teams working in perfect coordination. Amara would lead a diversionary assault on the construction site's perimeter defenses, drawing the infected's attention away from the network towers. Nuru would use her technical skills to physically access the network's central processing node and create an entry point for their infiltration. And Camila, along with Zainab, would voluntarily submit to the conversion process while maintaining their human consciousness through a combination of medical treatments and sheer force of will. "You're talking about suicide," Foley protested, her administrative mind recoiling from the logistics of what Camila was proposing. Even if the conversion process doesn't kill you, even if you somehow maintain your consciousness, you'll be part of their collective. They'll know everything you know. Exactly, Camila replied. They'll know everything we know, including how much we love each other, how willing we are to sacrifice for strangers, how we find hope in impossible circumstances. Human emotions and loyalties will become part of their collective consciousness, and collectives aren't designed to handle conflicting loyalties. Zainab had spent the previous 6 hours developing a cocktail of drugs and treatments that might protect their neural pathways during the conversion process. The infected enhancement seems to work by introducing new neural connections while preserving existing ones, she explained. If we flood our systems with neurotransmitters that reinforce our existing personality patterns before conversion, we might maintain our individual consciousness even within their collective. Might, Amara emphasized grimly. This entire plan is based on theories and assumptions. All the best plans are, Asha said quietly from where she sat preparing herbal supplements that would support Zainab's medical treatment. Certainty is a luxury we can't afford. The final preparation phase took on an almost ritualistic quality as the community gathered to support what everyone understood might be their last acts as independent human beings. Children who had learned to be brave beyond their years helped to prepare equipment. Adults who had discovered reserves of courage they never knew they possessed checked and rechecked every detail of their assigned roles. Janala approached Camila during the final hour, carrying a small wooden carving that she had been working on during quiet moments over the past weeks. It was a rough but recognizable figure of a woman with arms outstretched, protecting something precious. My grandmother always said that courage isn't about not being afraid, the young girl said, pressing the carving into Camila's hands. It's about choosing to protect what matters even when you're terrified. As dawn broke over Kijani City, the 3 teams moved into position with the precision of a military operation and the emotional weight of a funeral procession. Each woman carried not just her assigned equipment, but the hopes and prayers of everyone they were leaving behind. Amara's diversionary assault began exactly on schedule, with explosions and gunfire erupting around construction sites' eastern perimeter. The infected response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of enhanced humans converging on the perceived threat with coordination that would have been impossible for any traditional military force. While the infected focused on Amara's team, Nuru approached the central network tower through a drainage tunnel that brought her up directly beneath the primary processing node. Her technical skills, honed under months of extreme pressure, allowed her to access the system's core programming and create a backdoor entry point that would accept external neural input. "I'm in," she reported through their short-range communication system. "The network is online but not yet fully integrated. You have maybe 15 minutes before they detect the intrusion." Camila and Zainab had positioned themselves at a secondary conversion chamber that was operational but not heavily guarded. The drugs Zainab had developed were already coursing through their systems, creating a neurochemical environment that they hoped would preserve their essential humanity during the enhancement process. "Whatever happens next," Zainab said as they prepared to trigger the conversion sequence, "I want you to know that these past weeks have been the most meaningful of my life. Fighting beside you, serving something greater than ourselves, this is who we were meant to be." "This isn't goodbye," Camila replied firmly. "This is just a different kind of hello." The conversion process itself was unlike anything either woman could have imagined. Rather than the violent transformation they had witnessed in other victims, their prepared neural pathways channeled the enhancement in controlled directions. They felt their consciousness expanding, becoming aware of the vast network of minds that comprised the infected collective. But instead of losing themselves in that vastness, their human emotions and loyalties acted like anchors, maintaining their individual identity even as they gained access to the collective's shared knowledge and capabilities. They could feel the confusion rippling through the network as it encountered consciousness patterns that didn't conform to its expected parameters. Through the collective awareness, they experienced the infected's perspective for the first time. The network wasn't driven by malice or hatred, but by a fundamental conviction that their enhanced existence was superior to baseline humanity. They genuinely believed they were saving human civilization by improving it, by eliminating the inefficiencies and conflicts that had plagued human society. But human inefficiency and conflict weren't bugs in the system. They were features. The very qualities that the collective sought to eliminate were the sources of creativity, empathy, and growth that made human consciousness valuable. By introducing their unenhanced human perspectives into the network, Camila and Zaina began to create cognitive dissonance on a massive scale. The network is destabilizing, Nuru reported, monitoring the electronic systems from her position beneath the processing node. I'm seeing cascading failures across multiple communication channels. The infected throughout the construction site began to exhibit erratic behavior as the network struggled to process contradictory consciousness patterns. Some stood motionless as their enhanced minds tried to reconcile incompatible loyalties. Others began to move in confused circles as conflicting directives paralyzed their decision-making processes. Through their connection to the collective, Camila and Zainab could feel the system attempting to isolate and eliminate their disruptive influence. But human consciousness, shaped by millions of years of individual survival and social cooperation, proved remarkably resilient to external control. "Hold on," Camila said to Zainab through their shared mental connection. "Whatever they do to us, we hold on to who we are." The network's response was swift and brutal. Enhanced security protocols began attacking their neural patterns, trying to force conformity through what amounted to mental torture. Pain beyond description flooded their consciousness as the collective attempted to break down their individual identity barriers. But they had spent weeks learning to endure the unendurable, to find strength in their connections to each other and to the human community they served. Even under assault, their core consciousness remained intact, continuing to spread its disruptive influence throughout the network. The cascade failure that followed would be felt across the entire infected territory. As the network collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, thousands of enhanced individuals found themselves suddenly cut off from the collective consciousness that had guided their every action. Some reverted to their original human consciousness, confused and disoriented, but fundamentally themselves again. Others retained their enhanced capabilities, but regained their individual autonomy, no longer bound to collective's will. Still others simply shut down, their minds unable to function without the network's constant guidance. In the space of 30 minutes, the infected's greatest advantage, their perfect coordination, became their greatest weakness. The network that was supposed to make them invincible instead became the mechanism of their downfall. As the chaos spread throughout the infected territory, a Mars diversionary force found themselves fighting enemies that could no longer coordinate effectively. Nuru emerged from her position beneath the processing node to find the entire construction site in confusion, with enhanced individuals wandering aimlessly or simply standing motionless. But the victory came at a price that would haunt the survivors forever. Camila and Zainab, their consciousness permanently altered by their time within the collective, would never again be entirely human, nor entirely something else. They had become something new, bridges between what humanity had been and what it might become. 6 months after the collapse of the infected network, Camila stood on the rebuilt platform that had once been the radio station's broadcasting tower, looking out over a city that bore little resemblance to the Kijani she had known before the outbreak. The scars of the conflict were everywhere: burned buildings, empty neighborhoods, makeshift memorials to the thousands who had been lost, but so were the signs of renewal. The woman looking out over the city was both the same person who had been a nurse in the marketplace that first morning and someone entirely different. The neural modifications she had undergone during her time in the collective had left her with enhanced cognitive abilities and sensory perception, but more importantly, with a deep understanding of both human and post-human consciousness that made her uniquely qualified to guide the reconstruction. "The integration centers are reporting significant progress," Zainab said, approaching with a tablet full of data about their ongoing efforts to help recovered infected individuals readjust to independent consciousness. Like Camila, she bore the permanent changes of her sacrifice, enhanced analytical abilities, and an intuitive understanding of biological systems that had revolutionized their medical treatment protocols. The integration centers had been Camila's idea, based on her understanding that many of the recovered infected individuals retained valuable enhancements while struggling to function without the collective consciousness that had guided them for months. Rather than trying to reverse their modifications, the centers helped them learn to use their new abilities as independent individuals while reconnecting with their essential humanity. "Any word from the Northern Expedition?" Camila asked, referring to the team that Amara was leading to establish contact with other survivor communities throughout the region. They confirmed 3 more stable settlements, Zainab reported, all using variations of our integration model. It seems like our approach is being adopted across a much wider area than we originally expected. Nuru emerged from the broadcasting equipment that she had been upgrading, her technical skills having evolved far beyond their original scope. "I've got confirmation from the long-range communications array," she announced. "We're in contact with survivor communities on 4 continents now. The network collapse affected infected populations globally. The revelation that their desperate gambit had triggered a worldwide collapse of the infected collective had been both inspiring and sobering. While it meant that human consciousness had survived the invasion, it also meant that billions of people were dead, missing, or struggling with the psychological aftermath of collective integration. The children's education program is ready for your review," Folake said, joining their informal leadership meeting with her characteristic efficiency. Her role had evolved from refugee coordinator to something approaching mayor of their growing settlement, and she approached the task with the same systematic dedication that had made her an effective radio station manager. The education program was perhaps their most important long-term initiative. Children who had lived through the outbreak needed specialized support to process their trauma, but they also represented humanity's best hope for adapting to a world that included both baseline humans and various types of enhanced individuals. How are they responding to the integrated classroom model? Camila asked, referring to their experimental approach of including enhanced individuals as both students and teachers. "Better than we hoped," Folake admitted. "The children seem to adapt to cognitive diversity much more easily than adults. Some of them are developing their own hybrid approaches to problem solving that incorporate both enhanced and baseline thinking patterns." As the afternoon progressed, Camila found herself walking through the settlement that had grown around their original textile district stronghold. What had begun as a desperate refuge where 200 people had evolved into a thriving community of over 3,000, including baseline humans, various types of enhanced individuals, and a growing number of children who had been born after the outbreak. The marketplace that served as the community's social center bore little resemblance to the traditional African markets she remembered from before the outbreak. Vendors included both baseline humans selling traditional crafts and foods, and enhanced individuals offering services that would have been impossible before the outbreak. Medical treatments that worked at the cellular level, artistic creations that incorporated mathematical principles invisible to unenhanced perception, and technological innovations that bridged human intuition with computational precision. "Miss Camila," a young voice called out, and she turned to see Janal approaching with a group of other teenagers. The girl had grown considerably over the past months, but more importantly, she had become a natural leader among the young people in their community. "We've been working on a memorial project," Janal announced, gesturing toward a space near the center of the marketplace where construction was taking place. "We want to make sure everyone who was lost is remembered, but also that we celebrate what we've become." The memorial project had been controversial within the community. Some felt that any celebration of their current situation minimized the tragedy of those who had been lost. Others argued that focusing on loss rather than growth would dishonor the sacrifices that had made their survival possible. "What approach have you decided on?" Camila asked, genuinely curious about how the young people had resolved the ethical complexities that had challenged their adult leadership. "We're calling it the Garden of Possibilities," one of Janala's companions explained. "Each person who was lost get a plant or a tree, but we're arranging them to create patterns that represent what they might have contributed to our community if they had lived." It was a beautifully optimistic approach that acknowledged loss while affirming life, and Camila felt a familiar surge of hope for humanity's future. The children who had grown up during the outbreak had developed perspectives that neither baseline nor enhanced adults could easily achieve, a natural integration of different ways of thinking and being that might represent humanity's evolutionary next step. As evening fell over their settlement, Camila made her way to the small apartment that had become her private retreat. The walls were covered with photographs, drawings, and written memories from their journey. Images of the women who had become her closest family, documentation of the challenges they had overcome together, and plans for the future they were building. On her desk lay a letter that had arrived that morning through their growing inter-community mail system. It was from Asha, who had chosen to join one of the traveling medical teams that moved between settlements providing care and training. Her flowing handwriting carried news of communities as far as 2,000 kilometers away, all struggling with similar challenges of integration and reconstruction. The healing continues, Asha had written. Not just physical healing, but the deeper work of helping human consciousness adapt to a world that includes new possibilities. Your integration model is being studied and adapted everywhere I visit. You should be proud of what you started. But pride was complicated for someone who had sacrificed her original humanity to save what remained of human civilization. Camilla's enhanced consciousness allowed her to perceive patterns and connections that baseline humans miss, but it also meant that she experienced the world differently from the people she had fought to protect. A soft knock on her door interrupted her reflection, and she looked up to see Zainab entering with 2 cups of the herbal tea that Asha had taught them to prepare. "I thought you might want some company," Zainab said, settling into the chair across from Camilla's desk. "I know this time of day can be difficult." It was true. The enhanced perception that came with their neural modifications made twilight an overwhelming sensory experience, as the changing light revealed details and patterns that baseline human vision couldn't detect. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, a reminder of how much they had gained and lost. "Do you ever regret it?" Camilla asked quietly. "What we chose to do." Zainab considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally. "I regret all the pain and loss that brought us to that point. But the choice itself? No, we saved something precious. And we helped create something new that might be even more precious." Through their window, they could see the lights of their community coming on as darkness fell. Families gathering for evening meals, enhanced individuals sharing complex mathematical poems that served as both art and meditation, children playing games that incorporated both traditional rules and post-outbreak innovations. Nuru stopped by earlier, Zainab continued. She's made contact with a group of scientists in the Southern Territories who think they've developed a way to voluntarily share enhanced consciousness without losing individual identity. They want to invite a delegation to observe their work. The implications were staggering. If consciousness enhancement could be made voluntary and reversible, it would eliminate the fundamental conflict between baseline and enhanced humans that had driven the original outbreak. It would also mean that humanity's future could include multiple forms of consciousness existing in harmony rather than competition. A delegation, Camilla mused. That could be exactly what we need to move forward. Amara has already volunteered to lead the expedition. Zainab added with a slight smile. I think she's getting restless with administrative duties. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching their communities settle into rhythms of evening, Camilla felt something she hadn't experienced since before the outbreak. Genuine optimism about humanity's future. Not the desperate hope that had sustained them through the darkest days, but the calm confidence that came from seeing concrete progress towards something better. The outbreak had ended the world they had known, but it also revealed capabilities and connections that had always existed within human consciousness. The women who had fought together, sacrificed together, and built something new together had not just survived an apocalypse. They had discovered what it meant to be truly human in a universe full of infinite possibilities. Outside, the first stars were becoming visible in the deepening sky, and somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter carried on the evening breeze. The ultimate struggle was over, but the story of what humanity could become was just beginning. In her enhanced perception, Camilla could sense the faint electronic signatures of the communication networks that now connected their settlement to dozens of others across the continent and beyond. Each signal carried messages of hope, requests for assistance, offers of cooperation, and dreams of futures that would have been unimaginable before the outbreak. The darkness that had once threatened to consume everything had been transformed into the foundation for something unprecedented. A global community of conscious beings working together across every form of diversity to create a civilization worthy of their sacrifices. And in that transformation, the spirits of all who had been lost found their truest memorial, a future bright enough to justify any price paid to achieve it.